Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judy Maggio with KLRU. Welcome to Decibel Dialogue. Our guest today is Jim Henson with the Texas Politics Project, because you guys just came out with a brand new poll.
Day
Texas
one.
Tribune, Texas Politics Project poll, day one. All right, so who was polled?
1,200 registered voters, balanced. We weight the data so that it's representative by key demographic categories. So Texans from all over the place, as long as they're registered to vote.
And what's the margin of error?
2.83% on the overall sample, and when we get to talking about the Democratic race, about 4.5 percentage points.
Okay. So I know there were a lot of different findings, and I find them all fascinating, but I want to start with, would you vote to re-elect Donald Trump? Let's talk about the results here, because this is all voters, Democrats and Republicans that you talked to, right?
Right.
1,200 voters. So talk about the results.
Well, what was interesting about this was that it was as evenly a divided result, I think, as we've seen. And,
really?
And to give you a little bit of a inside look, when we first did the rounding, we were going to have to report basically 51-50 just because of the way that there was rounding error because of everything. So we had to break it down to a couple extra decimal
Razor
points.
thin.
But it was basically 49 point something versus 49 point something that both rounded up to 50. So pretty close. And I think what's going on here, we knew this was going to be a real eye-opener. I had somebody earlier in the day so this means that there's a 50% chance that Donald Trump will lose in Texas, right? And I said, no, it actually does not mean that, in fact. We're 16 months out from the election. Donald Trump is a very polarizing figure, and I think that there's probably 2 or 3 things going on in making this result so close. Call it 4. With the one being, we're talking about Donald Trump. He mobilizes very powerful opinions on either side.
Both sides, yeah.
He's also, mercurial in the way that he enters the public debate. How's that for diplomatic? And so while we were in the field, his proposal to put a 5% tariff on everything coming out
from
across the
Mexico?
border from Mexico was live. I think
not a popular position.
He announced
in Texas,
towards the end of the polling period that they weren't going to do it after all, and that was a big issue in Texas. And so I think that affected some views around the margin. So there's those 2 contextual things, and then there's basically, as we were talking before we went live, independents in this, and I think this is probably related to this tariff thing, though it's hard to tell. Independents broke 40%. For re-electing Trump, 60% for somebody else. And independents in Texas tend to break a little more conservative and a little more Republican. But again, Trump has very unpredictable effects on people, and they vary a lot. And then on top of that, you've got independents who are kind of the least attentive, least interested in politics, and their attitudes tend to move around a lot and to be not like partisans.
So they're not really entrenched and invested in a particular party.
That's exactly right. And these are what we call true independents. So they're in this sample, they're about 10% of the sample. And so if you figure they're going to move around a lot, that's really going to move us more into the range of where we would expect this number to be. And again, this far out, all registered voters, we don't know who's going to vote. There's a lot of things are obviously going to happen between now and the fall of 2020.
Okay. I'm looking at the Democrats and Republicans in the would you vote to re-elect Donald Trump poll, and 85% Democrat definitely no, Republicans definitely yes, 73%. So talk about polarization. They're very, very firm belief systems on both sides.
In a lot of the graphics that we do for the Texas Politics Project, we put the bar charts on Tribune on the x-axis, so they're vertical. And then we talk about the twin towers all the time.
The twin towers. Yeah.
The polarized, the extreme, extremely favorable toward Trump on one side, Republicans on one side, extremely unfavorable Democrats, usually a little bit higher on the other side.
I thought it was interesting, and we don't have a full screen graphic on this, but these characteristics that you all had people weigh in on with Donald Trump, has the temperament to serve, is honest and trustworthy. How did that come out?
Well, what it comes out is, usually, and these results are very stable over time. We've asked this, we track these, we've asked these 3 or 4 times. They come out, almost all of them, more negative toward the president by a little bit than positive on these personality traits. He scores a little bit more highly on competence. That's kind of the only thing this time that, and in the past polls too, where he's in positive territory. But again, we've got the two towers in all of these as well.
Okay.
Highly,
the Republican tower and the Democrat
highly
tower.
deeply polarized in terms of the president's personal qualities, but he is seen overall, he does better on the competence side than he does on
warm and fuzzy?
on the honest, trustworthy temperament side.
Okay.
And I don't think anybody's I don't think he would be surprised by that,
right.
frankly.
So I also want to talk about the job ratings that you all did on some key members in Texas politics. So you started with Donald Trump, of course, at the top of the heap there, and it was, what, 52%?
Yeah, which is in the high end of the band where he performed. He's been performing since he's been president.
Okay.
At least since the early days.
Okay. 44% disapprove.
I think the thing to notice about that, Judy, just to pause for a second, is that does give us a sense of where Texas is, for all that we're looking at that 50-50 number and thinking, wow, maybe Texas is just so different. You know, that's several points above the midpoint where he's been nationally in his job approval. That
so we're still a red state.
We're still a pretty Republican state. I mean, you know, it's getting more competitive, but that's a good heat check right there.
All right, now we're talking about Congress. 60% disapprove.
You
of
can't
the job
really even read
Congress
those congressional. And you know what? That's actually since the Republicans took over. Since the Republicans so we got a Republican in the White House, and then the Democrats actually took over the House. That's actually kind of on the high end.
Yeah. Okay.
Because there are some Democrats going, well, at least we got the House, you know, but very few.
All right. I want to also talk about John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, because Cruz has much higher approval ratings, according to this poll, than Cornyn. And Cornyn's up for re-election.
And that's a regular feature, and Cornyn's numbers are actually a little bit better this time than they've been historically. John Cornyn is an interesting case. You know, he's obviously been in office, you know, been elected.
A long time.
Yeah, a long time, since 2002. Been elected 3 times, now going to be up for his fourth run in this. You know, but he's a previous generation Republican in a lot of ways.
He's more moderate.
Well, I mean, I think it's more, you know, he's more of an inside player. I think if you look at his voting record and you look at his politics, you know, I don't think anybody's actually ever accused John Cornyn of being a moderate other than with spite. You know, it doesn't really hold up in his voting record to view him that way.
So you don't think he's more moderate than Ted Cruz?
You know, I think I think Ted Cruz is more conservative.
Okay, all right, okay. Maybe that's how I should have worded it.
You know, I mean, I think that, you know, Ted Cruz is, but John Cornyn, for the life of our polling series of the last decade, has always been kind of damned with faint praise from his own party. You know, he was, you know, his job approval level among Republicans is in the 60s. You know, Cruz, Abbott, Donald Trump, you know, they work in the high 70s, 80s, in some cases even mid to high 80s.
Abbott and Trump both did well on this particular poll.
Right, and they do very well among Republicans. John Cornyn has just not done as well. And I think that for much of his career, Cornyn has been content to be an inside player, to run as a staunch Republican. I mean, you know, to go back to our conversation before, people look closely at John Cornyn. Nobody's going to mistake him for a closet liberal if you look at his voting record, if you look at where he positions himself. But he's in the Senate leadership, and I think the number to look at the Cornyn number in conjunction with is that Congress number.
Yeah, disapprove of Congress.
I mean, Cornyn is
both the Senate and the House.
Yeah, he's an inside player, and he gets dinged for that in a Republican Party that has been, you know, intensely critical of the performance of institutions in Washington, D.C., particularly Congress. And he's never done what Ted Cruz has done, which is run against Washington, D.C., you know, in a full-throated way. It's about their temperament and their personal style and presentation, I think, more than, you know, some deep ideological kind of commitment that one has and the other doesn't.
So going down this particular one about how would you rate the job done by, it looks like no one knows who Dennis Bonnen is.
Yeah, and that's the way it should be.
Because it's a brand new House Speaker. Only one session of his belt.
And that's actually, and those numbers are actually pretty high for a speaker. You know, Joe Strauss, you know, when Joe Strauss when we did this job approval for Joe Strauss right after the beginning of his first term as Speaker, the unknowns, I think, were close to the people that didn't have an opinion were close to 70. Bonnen has actually become well known much more quickly than other speakers, and I was talking with some other folks that are into this stuff not that long ago as we were looking at these numbers. And say Ross Ramsey and Josh, who we work with,
at the Tribune,
and discussing how much of this is Bonnen himself, or the fact that Bonnen asserted a higher profile more quickly this term so that they could push the property taxes and the school finance reform, and how much of it might be just that there's more people paying attention. I mean, we're sitting here, I've been talking about this stuff all day. There's the Texas Tribune, there's a Capitol Press Corps that's following the legislature very closely. It may just be that the days when the rule of thumb for the Speaker of the House was, you don't want to be known by, any more than, a quarter or 30%. That if you cross the 50% threshold, you're kind of done. I mean, that's what Speaker Laney used to say. And it may just be that we're living in a different world, a different media environment.
And finally, the Texas legislature.
Well, it's kind of but it's less than it was at the end of the last session.
Yeah,
at the end
well,
of the
this was a more kumbaya session.
Well, and you remember
they got stuff done too.
Yeah, last session ended with people, threatening fist fights and gunplay in the parking lot.
And there were more divisive issues.
They didn't get a bunch of stuff done. The whole point of the legislature this time for the Republican leadership was to get more stuff done. These numbers, 38 approve, 29 disapprove. I mean, it's nothing to write home about, but most people don't pay that much attention to the Texas legislature.
And they're doing a lot better than Congress when it comes to
doing a lot better than Congress,
rating.
and better than they did in 2017. And for Republicans, if you look at the internals for the Republican leadership, Republican voters, their approval levels were about where they've been, but a lot of improvement among Democrats. So the idea that there was going to be more cooperation, that there was going to be a little bit more bipartisan agreement on the agenda, primarily on public education and actually putting money into public education. Democrats aren't just saying, hey, we love all these Republican legislators and we love the leadership, but Republican approval numbers went up, noticeably. And I think, it doesn't reverse the tide, but it has the effect that I think the Republican leadership wanted, which is it's kind of blunted the Democratic edge. It's lowered the temperature among Democrats. Hasn't turned them, but it's lowered the temperature.
Well, you brought up Democrats. I'm wondering how the crowded field of Democratic candidates for president. We have two Texans, O'Rourke and Castro. How did they do, and what are Texans in your poll saying about the race on the Democratic side?
Well, in some ways this race looks like the results we got on the Democratic side look not that different from the national numbers, albeit with a little bit of a Texas twist. So Joe Biden was at the top of the pack, but not overwhelmingly. He had about 23% of the people that said that they were going to vote in the Democratic primary. O'Rourke finished second with 15. Elizabeth Warren, who's been moving nationally, showed some movement here, came in third at 14. Essentially tied with O'Rourke, and Bernie Sanders at 12, and then everyone below that was less than 10. The one to note that got close was Pete Buttigieg at 8 in fifth place. Julian Castro was down at 3%.
Well, he's not done well nationally either.
So I think if you look at O'Rourke and Castro, these numbers don't really provide much grist for some of the rationale for their candidacy. Now, they will tell you, they have more principled rationale, and I'm sure they do. But in practical political terms, part of what makes a Texan attractive to Democratic donors and potentially Democratic voters is that if you could make Texas competitive, you really turn the tables, and you can really turn the tide.
It to those donors,
you can really turn the tide in a presidential race that's been close. We're not seeing that argument being made here. We did, more sort of favorability ratings of both of these candidates. We had done them in February. We did them again in June. Neither of them moved very much. So Beto O'Rourke is kind of stalled out at 42-46, which is 4 points underwater with Democrats about where they were, actually a little bit less approving than they were in February. Julian Castro's not moved at all. Overall, he was 27 favorable, 32 unfavorable, with 41% not having an opinion. Neither of these readings nor the horse race provide a very strong warrant for saying we can carry Texas because there's a groundswell of support for us.
And
now, they have time, to be fair, but at this particular point in time, the burden of proof is still upon them.
And we were talking earlier about it's very different for Beto O'Rourke to take on Ted Cruz than it is for Beto O'Rourke to run for president. I mean, he was wildly popular and came so close to beating Ted Cruz. So talk about the difference in these races and why he may not be trending so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're running against a Republican who is intensely unpopular with Democrats, which is Ted Cruz. I mean, we have to draw that distinction based on the discussion we had a minute ago about Cornyn and Cruz. The contrast is easy and the mobilization effort is easy because it's a very simple contrast. If you're Ted Cruz and I'll let you be Beto O'Rourke. If you're Beto O'Rourke and I'm Ted Cruz and voters are looking at us, there's not much confusion. And there's not a lot of decision.
There's no middle ground or compromise there.
There's not a lot of decision making that has to go on.
Yeah.
If you're Beto O'Rourke and you're one of 23, or even if the field was narrower, you're making much more finely grained distinctions, and there's a lot more decision making that has to take place among Democratic primary voters in a crowded presidential field, and there's a lot more work that Beto O'Rourke has to do to make the case. If I'm Beto O'Rourke and you're you can still be Beto O'Rourke. You're Beto O'Rourke and I'm Joe Biden or I'm Elizabeth Warren. There's a lot of the difference is not as clear. There's a distinction to be made, and it's a lot of work, and it's a different challenge on a much broader, on a much wider playing field for a much longer time. So it's a tougher challenge.
So if you were to glean the highlights from this, what would they be for folks watching?
Oh, I would say two things. One, if you take this in toto, particularly the Trump 50-50 number, but also some of the job approval numbers of the statewide, Texas is getting more competitive. I mean, there's no two ways about it that, particularly when it comes to making assessments about national politics with Donald Trump at the center, that's catalyzing some of the change that had been happening more gradually. So in terms of presidential politics, Trump has rattled things here and shook, it's almost like, there's sediment that's kind of building. He's kind of shaking it up, but I don't think that if you look at that Democratic race, the Democrats have not quite galvanized themselves in a way that's going to enable them to contribute to that as much as they might have hoped, I think, in the early going, at least not so far. Now,
does the number of candidates dilute that galvanization?
Well, it does. I think it does, and I think somebody with Biden's history also does that. But, I think going into this race, the argument that Democrats were well positioned with these strong candidates has not been borne out in the presidential level. And, I think we're already seeing, and we've done it, I think, on one of your other shows with Ben, we're already seeing some second guessing about whether the better way to take advantage of the environment would have been for O'Rourke to have run for the Senate seat against John Cornyn, who, as we've said, is not weak in some fundamental way, but not as strong among Republicans as the guy that O'Rourke almost beat a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Always interesting, great analysis. I look forward to these polls because I'm a political junkie, and we appreciate you taking time to come talk about it. Jim Henson with the Texas Politics Project.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for giving us a little bit of your afternoon, and make it a great day out there.